Morning, dear friends. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Today is Monday, the 25th of August 22nd, and we're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. I'd like to dedicate today's learning to the first yard site of our dear Dr. Yosef's father, David ben Yosef, his Neshama Shavan Aliyah, and prayerful wishes for good news for all of Klal Yisrael, and in particular, let's mention the dear, wonderful, devoted members of our Talmud Chabura, day in and day out, make time in their calendar, put everything else aside whenever possible to study the entire Talmud. And here we are. We are studying now Masechet Shabbat, chapter 19. That's 130. We're in the 130 zone, which means that we're really, if we were on a flight, we'd say we're making our initial descent. Initial descent usually means you have another good 20 minutes, so we're not done quite yet, but we're getting there.
Call back.
And I want to give a fast recap of Friday's Gemara, and then we'll jump right in. I'm going to hit mute all because of background noise, but inviting everyone to unmute for comments, etc. So we were talking about circumcision and the fact the Mishnah mentions that occasionally circumcision happens under duress at times of persecution. Particularly, we know in the Roman times, there were a number of times that they outlawed circumcision, and that actually was one of the great motivators of the Bar Kokhba revolt. The Romans saw circumcision as one of those acts that were integral to the Jewish spirit, Jewish identity, Jewish national aspirations, and they felt that outlawing that along with other parts of Judaism would destroy Judaism. And the Gemara comments that circumcision is one of those mitzvahs that the Jewish people were willing to die for. They were moisar nefesh. The Gemara made a comment, a mitzvah that the Jews were moisar nefesh, they put their lives in the line. It was observed even when things were not so challenging, whereas mitzvah that the Jewish people were refuya biyadam, they were not entirely, didn't hold on strong, they didn't risk their life. Well, even after times of oppression, it remains, as we say in Yiddish, abyssal shvach. Now, the Gemara, to illustrate that point, tells us a fascinating story of a Jew called Elisha Bal Kanafayim, as we called him Elisha, the wingman. And Elisha was actually very devoted to tefillin. First of all, he was renowned for being meticulous about being in the ideal state of hygiene to wear tefillin. And also, he risked his life to wear tefillin publicly when it was illegal. He was chased down by a Roman. He put the tefillin in his hand. And when the Roman asked what was there, he said, "Oh, it's nothing. It's just some wings. It's just some kanfei yoina." And miraculously, what the Roman guy saw were kanfei yoina. And we discussed on Friday, were they actually kanfei yoina or did they appear to be so? But the bottom line is, a miracle happened and his life was saved. So, Dr. Hammer, the final, what do we call it, a Rorschach test?
Yeah.
So we hear this story, and what do you hear? Do you hear an act of ultimate sacrifice, or do you hear a little bit of squishiness? And so if you'd ask me my opinion, I would say, wow, what kind of devotion. The guy wears tefillin in public, even though the Jewish people are under the threat of death. He had a very, very narrow miss. And this seems to be Rashi's take, that Elisha Bal Kanafayim was the only one that was so devoted. And therefore, we see that generally speaking, it was Refuya B'Yadam. The Tosfos quotes the Rashbam saying, actually, this is a story that shows us that the Jews were not supremely willing to make a sacrifice. Elisha Bal Kanafayim did take risks, but he wouldn't die for the tefillin. That's my understanding of Rashi anyways. And so from there, we see that the Jewish people, although they were very devoted, but for a bris, they would die. For tefillin, they came right up to the ledge, but then they turned around. And that's the story over here of Elisha Bal Kanafayim. Now, or in just a moment after we'll finish our ensuing dialogue or conversation, we're going to resume a discussion about how to carry the Mohel's knife on Shabbos. Can you carry it in a Rosh Hashanah? Can you carry it in a Rosh Hashanah? Can you carry it in a chutzner that's not properly eroved? So that will be the following discussion. Any comments before we jump into the Gemara are welcome, and then we will proceed with our Talmud. Anyone? Going once, going twice.
Okay, I'll make a comment. You got me.
Go ahead, doctor.
So I've read, I don't remember where, it was a while ago, regarding wearing tefillin all day long. So we know that in our history, there were quite a few tzaddikim or abanim that wore tefillin all day long. They go Mevilna, there are others, today also some. But then I read that regular Jews should really avoid wearing tefillin all day long because there's a shemitz, there's a little bit of saying of being a Baal Gaiva. Look at me, I'm wearing tefillin all day long.
Yeah, Shulchan Aruch, I believe, says that nowadays it would be mechsi ki yuhara. It would be an appearance, someone taking on a status that's not really befitting. But it would appear that in Talmud times, the prevailing practice would be to wear tefillin all day, with the exception of an extremely messy job or when one went into the restroom. But and actually, maybe that's an additional understanding of what it means that the Jewish people were not holding on strongly. Maybe they put it on in the morning, but they didn't wear it all day long. Oh, I do want to add, Dr. Stammer, regards from Rabbi David, Dr. Levin, and regards from Rabbi Levin, who davened with us today.
Yoni was there.
So we had the very big privilege of davening with the Chashuva rabbi who embodies the New York, Florida exchange, or the New York, Florida corridor. So we were very, very.
Yeah, well, right now I'm in Florida together with David, except I don't come. He does.
So anyway, so we have regards for you. All right, let's share the screen. Let's get started. And Doctor, welcome to Florida. Maybe it's almost time for Tzeitzchan L'Shalom, but
it is almost time to say. I was at I don't know if you know, but the last yeshiva night, Tuesday night, I was there.
I missed a lot of people last yeshiva night by not the one time I didn't show up. Apparently,
well, you were on vacation in well, not vacation. It was the wedding.
I was away though. Yes. All righty, let us get started. Here we go. The Mishnah. Oh, here we go. Amar Rabbi Abba Barabba. I'm sorry. Amar Rabbi Abba Baravada. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Hamachas. Once upon a time, Shachachu v'lo yeviu ismul me'erev Shabbos. They failed to prepare the knife. They failed to bring the knife from before Shabbos, which is the preferred method. V'heviu b'Shabbos, and so they had no choice but to bring the knife of the bris on Shabbos. Derech. Hold on, I'm just on the wrong page here. My Derech. Gagoy.
They did it in not a direct way, by going over the roofs and through the yards, as opposed to out in the
Right. So they didn't carry it in the public domain. They did it like a scene in a movie where they're having some kind of escape, and they, instead of going the normal way, they were jumping on roofs and going through backyards. They didn't go into the public thoroughfare. Bevio b'Shabbos. Shaloi Birtzain. This is the line that's going to get us really perturbed. Shaloi Birtzain Rabbi Eliezer. And this was very much not to the liking of Rabbi Eliezer. So, why the question? Well, let's see the Gemara's question right away. Maskiv lo Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says what we're thinking. Rabbi Eliezer shouldn't have a problem bringing the knife. Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says you could bring it in a Rosh Hashanah. So he says, Shaloi Birtzain Rabbi Eliezer? Question mark. Do you think this is not consistent with Rabbi Eliezer? Adarabba. Rabbi Eliezer, who? The Shari. Rabbi Eliezer is the guy, is the one, is the opinion who should say, wonderful. Do it again. Do it in the public, do it in the streets. Shaloi Birtzain Rabbi Eliezer. The Shari Afilu B'Rshus Harabim. So you'll say, obviously, Rabbi, what are you talking about? What it means that we say Shaloi B'Rtzoin Rabbi Eliezer, as Rabbi Eliezer says, you're being frummer. Don't be frummer than Rabbi Eliezer. Carry it in the streets. Why do you need to make yourself meshuga? To carry it through roofs and backyards? The Shari Afilu B'Rshus Harabim, Rabbi Eliezer says, all matters of Shabbos desecration are suspended to allow us to have a bris milah. You're allowed to carry your knife, maybe open carry, but you're allowed to carry your knife to the bris. Ella. So how do we got to read this? Maybe the pshat is that it was in accordance to what the rabbis wanted. The asri derech reshus harabim, because they say don't bring the knife in the public domain, but maybe they allow v'sharo derech gagois, v'derech chatzerois, v'karpefiois. The rabbis do allow carrying the knife over roofs, through courtyards, and through other kinds of courtyards, backyards, closed-in areas. So the Gemara says, no, that doesn't make sense. And we sharu, the rabbis don't allow this. So when we said Shalei B'Ritzayin Rabbi Elazar, we said, oh, Rabbi Elazar is even more makel. And the Chachamim are the ones that are happy, but the Chachamim aren't happy there. They don't allow it. How do we see this? The rabbis say, Kishem she'ein mevi'in oisei derech reshus harabim. This is a brisa that quotes the opinion of the Chachamim. Just as you're not allowed to carry a knife in Times Square, kach ein mevi'in oisei loy derech gagois, v'loy derech karpefos, v'loy derech chatzerois. It is equally not permitted to carry the knife of the circumcision over the roofs, through the enclosed areas, through the chatzerois. Rashi, what's wrong with carrying in a courtyard? Because there is not an eruv, and so there's a rabbinic prohibition from carrying, and the Chachamim include in their prohibition even the moyel's knife, because you gotta prepare before Shabbos.
Rabbi,
Yes.
so what are the practical consequences of this prohibition? Does it mean that the circumcision has to be postponed until Sunday? That is to performed on the day where it is not supposed to perform, that is, there is one mitzvah against another.
Right. Possibly. We're still in the middle of the dialogue, so, but yeah, you'd have to wait if you don't have a bris. Dr. Hammer, don't say use your teeth. That's not an option.
It seems a question.
Yes.
Going on the roofs, it has to do with kavana, marasayan, and you said in the beginning, sort of tongue in cheek. It's like in a TV or a movie that they're running away. When someone does something surreptitiously like that, if you see somebody on the roof with a knife, and probably with a talus also, maybe going pretty quickly, or walking pretty quickly, what are you going to think? I mean, and why is he doing that? Either it's allowed or it's not allowed, but you're certainly not going to think that he's up to anything good, or that he's proud of what he's doing. It's like he wants, I'm really
No. So I'll tell you, if it would be permitted, so then it would become a known thing that on Shabbos you can't carry in the public domain. Well, people did know there is a distinction between carrying in an area where there's an eruv, and there's carrying without an eruv. There's carrying in your own yard. So I think people understand to some extent that there are different locations. But yeah, I still am envisioning this kind of James Bond kind of escape, holding the knife and jumping from roof to roof and through backyards. But I imagine if the halacha were to be so, then it would be something that people would recognize. That's what I suspect. And that may explain why we had the conversation about open carry. Now, I know you're saying a guy running with a knife, usually that is the kind of thing that you assume is associated with a crime, not a mitzvah. I hear you with that. I suspect that the Ismail Shalmila had a distinct appearance. Like today, the Moyel's scalpel or knife does have a distinct shape and form. And so, but it's a fair question. I just gotta throw in over here. In the course of my blessed career here in Hallandale, Hollywood, Florida, serving the Jewish community. So, we have a lot of wonderful people and a lot of wonderful, but sometimes you have some strange experiences that leave questions. And so I visit, do we have it on here? I have a number of people that I would visit, especially early on. Myself, I would go very frequently to the avant-garde. The Avant-Garde is one of the buildings here on the intercoastal side, across from the 20, more diagonally across from the Parker Plaza. And there was a security guard who was always very friendly and always let me in at night. And one day he came to me and he said, I have a present for you. I said, okay, what's the present? And he hands me a knife, one of those like a hunting knife in a sheath. And it was a very odd thing. And he says, oh, I had a dream that I'm supposed to give the rabbi a knife. And well, I said, I was relieved that when his dream said to give the rabbi a knife, it was within its sheath, handed to me. So I was so weirded.
At least you don't have to worry about carrying once you're stabbed.
I was so weirded out. I didn't say no. I'm like, I was afraid to say no. I took it. And then I came home and my wife is like, well, how do you know that was that's not a knife that had a crime committed with it? And what do you do with a knife that has someone's DNA? Give it to the rabbi. So, well, nothing came of it, but we're talking about strange knife experiences. That was one of the odder and more perturbing experiences. It wasn't an anti-Semitic, it wasn't like a threat or it was just weird. But anyways,
because being a rabbi is tough, huh?
I'm sorry?
I said being a rabbi must be tough.
Well, I'm not going to complain. I think it's a very blessed and meaningful job.
Do you still have the knife, Rabbi? Do you still have the knife?
I do.
Good.
Did
Good
you
for
capture it?
Rabbi,
Yes.
sorry I was late. I took Rosalie to the airport. She went to Florida for a week. I don't understand.
I know some people there if you need anything.
You're the first one I call when I have a problem. Rabbi, I don't understand why we're having so much of a discussion of what I see as a very rare occurrence. Basically, in Montreal, and I imagine everywhere else, the Moyle leaves his stuff wherever he has to do the bris on Shabbos, and then he walks over.
Right.
Why such a big discussion? How often could it occur?
Because our discussion predates the fact of the matter. Today, the halacha is that you leave your knife at the location of the bris before Shabbos. But now we are having a conversation. Rabbi Lazar says, you don't need to leave your bris. Don't leave your moyel knife. You carry it. Show everybody. Remember, this was our Mishnah. Show everybody how special Shabbos is. And now we have an anecdote that kind of is bridging the different opinions, or at least is we're analyzing and trying to see who it matches. In this instance, they forgot. So we already know that they're not using Rabbi Eliezer as the ideal behavior, the ideal practice, but yet we're trying to see, okay, but Lamaisa B'di'eved, were they relying on Rabbi Eliezer? Well, then why does it say that he wasn't happy? Okay, so it was the Chachamim. And just spoiler alert, the next line we're going to say, well, actually, this story didn't satisfy Rabbi Eliezer. He wants the knife to go in the streets. It didn't satisfy the Chachamim, who say you just got to stay home entirely. It's another third opinion, Rabbi Shimon, who says that you can't carry a knife on the street, but you can carry it surreptitiously through avoiding a Rosh Hashanah, avoiding the public domain. And so really, the Brisa here is being used to help us narrow and define the different opinions, and that's where we're heading to. Rebel, the practice Lamaisa that you know and that I know in Montreal and in Florida to bring the knife beforehand is because we are beneficiaries of the work of the Gemara and then the work of the halachas that follow, and so we have a very clear and set way of.
Rabbi, there's something else involved. Why not avoid Mechalel Shabbos if you can?
Because if it's not, well, first of all, sometimes mistakes happen. Sometimes, or maybe the moil has two brisin. But also, we need to know the halacha. And you know what? We learned already that a knife is the moil's knife is a high value item. And so if you don't have to leave it in some stranger's house, maybe it'll be sold on eBay. So I could understand the moil if he's able to hold on to it before. But the real answer is, according to Rabbi Lazar, we publicize the fact that bris is so important. We're mechalel Shabbos. So if you can justly desecrate Shabbos for bris, then it would be a public affair. Similar to the halacha that says that if a person lo yaleinu chas v'shalom is sick and you need to be mechalel Shabbos, we don't look for a child, we don't look for a Gentile. The gadol, the oldest, most prestigious person, does it to publicly show everyone that if a person's life is at risk, we are mechalel Shabbos without any hesitation, without any any internal resistance or regret. And so that would be the reason, Doctor.
I was just thinking that you could come up with a connection to the Chanukiah and Pirsume Nisa about the importance of Brit Milah. It's so important that you want to do it in all of its involvements publicly. Just an interesting thing.
Yeah.
To think
As a
about.
matter of fact, just along those lines, there's a discussion in halacha. What do you do if you could do a morning bris, but everybody works, everyone goes to the city before sunrise, and you could do an afternoon before sunset, you could do a bris and have a big crowd. And there's a machloikis in the poiskim. What do you do? Do we say zrizim aktimim l'mitzvahs?
Right.
Are you zaras even if you don't have a crowd? Or do we say b'roi vam hadras melech, that the way we honor Hashem is doing a mitzvah in public? And there are many poskim, and I think the Chabad, in the Chabad world, the Rebbe's and the psak that follows is better to do a bris later on in the day, but have a larger crowd to honor, to publicize, and to celebrate the important mitzvah of Milah. Of course, this is not a license to miss a bris or to fail to do the bris on time, but to do it later on and to accommodate a greater crowd is something that is within the tradition, and for that idea, for the very reason and the idea that you're saying, which is about publicizing. Excuse me.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Quick personal on the lighter side. 45 years ago, my brother-in-law became rabbi in Bradley Beach. The first week, somebody invited him to a bris and told him it'll be at 6:30. And my brother-in-law, and it was in Deal, which is 5 minutes away by car, Sephardic bris from the Syrian community. 6:20, he knocks on the door. A housekeeper opens the door. May I help you? Well, I'm Rabbi Bialik. I'm here for the bris. Hold on. 5 minutes later, the Balabayas comes in his pajamas. He says, "Good morning, Rabbi. What are you doing here?" "I'm here for the bris." He says, "It's tonight." My brother-in-law had never been to a bris that wasn't during the daytime. So I mean, after that, but I mean, it was.
No, I don't understand. But another problem, if it's night, if it's after skiing, they missed the 8th day.
No, it was probably in the summer where it wasn't.
Right, it wasn't this. Right, exactly.
But yet, certainly in a proper, you know.
You didn't think, but I yeah.
Very interesting. The things you learn on the job.
Things you learn as a rabbi. Nobody ever gave him a knife, I don't think. No.
All right, El Amar Rav Ashi. So here is how Rav Ashi explains this story. It was Shaloi B'Rtzayin, Rabbi Eliezer, Machlukasa. It was not consistent with Rabbi Eliezer or the rabbis who argue with him. Everybody was unsatisfied with the way they actually enacted that bris by carrying the knife in the manner through the back alleys. Ella B'Ratzayin Rabbi Shimon. It was consistent with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Why? The Tanan, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, Echad Gagois, the Echad Karpefos, the Echad Chatzerois, whether on the rooftops or through a backyard or through a courtyard, Kulon Rishus Echad Hein, Likelim Sheshavsu Be Soichon. They have a unique relationship to the kelim that were there from the onset of Shabbos, that you can carry them around. So Rabbi Shimon has an interesting opinion, which is that although generally we don't carry in these areas absent in Eruv, if the keli started out with the onset of Shabbos in those spaces, well, then you're allowed to carry in them. Even though, halachically, there needs to be an Eruv to carry from the house into them. Let's read Rashi. We're going to go back. Belazar says you carry the knife publicly in the public tongue. And the people who brought the knife in the back alley, they were displaying their perspective, which is that we aren't doiche Shabbos for anything other than the essential acts of the circumcision. And also not consistent with those who argue with Rabbi Eliezer. The Asri Derech HaTzeiros, they also say that you're not allowed to carry the knife of the bris through the back alleys, through the courtyards, through a Rishos HaYachid. The Hamidu Chachamim Devreihem, because the rabbis uphold the Chazal's opinion. The Isser Shabbos Af B'Makom Karis, they will prohibit these acts that are not immediate acts of bris, even though the absence of a bris is karis, but still they gave the force, they gave the Chazal, the Rabbanan's opinion, an incredibly strong force. Ella Baratzain Rabbi Shimon Shemater Af L'Davar Harishos, because Rabbi Shimon also generally has a slightly more, I was going to use the word mild, but a slightly more lenient attitude towards these courtyards. Rashi, the Tanan Rabbi Shimon Omer Echad Gagos, ve'afilu hein shel ba'olim harbe. Even if there are many different owners of stuff, mitaltali, even if the different courtyards and backyards belong to different individuals, mitaltali mizelaza, you're allowed to carry from one courtyard to the other. So I'm imagining that you could carry from the Lamer's tennis courts, the Lamer's tennis courts on the other side. You can carry from the Lamer's tennis court to the Lamer's pool deck, to the Malagos pool deck, even though they are different, they're not public domains. I mean, maybe, but if they, and then we're talking about if there isn't an Eruv, the only time that the Chazal added a restriction that says you cannot carry even from one private domain to the other, absent an Eruv Chatzeros, that's only from homes. What are karpifos? Rashi chooses to explain. Im shel beis asayimhu. It's an enclosed area with the size of 2 saw, which was a measurement of land. Metaltal lebukulan. You can carry the entire thing. But if it's larger and it's not enclosed in a living kind of way, it's called a separate. It's still called one rishus legabe chaver legabe chatzal tatel beisamis bezel beisamis hazel. Anyways, long story short, you can carry from one to the other. Sheshafsu b'seichan. What does it mean that they kept Shabbos there? Shekisha kidesh hayoim. When Shabbos came in, hayu b'soichai, they were in the yard, in the backyard, in the courtyard, but they were not inside the house. If they were in the house, basically, long story short, that much of the restrictions of carrying without an Erev Chatzeros are, according to Rabbi Shimon, applied to Kalim that are not already out in the quasi outside. This is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and therefore he is comfortable allowing carrying the knife of the bris from one courtyard to another, because generally speaking, there is license to carry under a variety of circumstances. This is how Rav Ashi explains this, which rabbi would have been the posek of the story where they brought the knives through the alleyway. Dr. Stamler, you're muted, but please, you're saying something? No, okay, I thought you were figured. Someone was indicating something they wanted to speak.
I have something to say, Rabbi.
Go ahead.
So carrying a knife versus carrying the key to your tie, they don't make something like that to be attached to you, so you won't be carrying.
Let's keep this Gemara a little bit abstract, because we're talking at a place where there's no Erev Chatzeros and there is no Erev, and so most of our let's not. That's a different topic, an important topic, but let's keep it out of this conversation for now, if you don't mind.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you. Bo minei Rav Zera Rav Asi. Rav Zera. Now we're gonna. By the way, so let's see. Masechet Shabbos is going to continue until Kuf Nun Zayin, I believe it is. Kuf Nun Zayin. That means approximately 27 blot, which is approximately 54, 53 amudim. And then the next Masechta is Eruvin. Eruvin is a complex Masechta. When we get to 150, we'll talk about if we're going to go to Eruvin or if we'll go to another Masechta first. But for now, we're going to get a little taste of a conversation about Eruv. Boy, Rav Zera Rav Asi. So Rav Zera asked Rav Asi a question. Mavoi sheloi nishtatu boy. You have an alleyway with a number of homes opening into it, and they did not make an eruv. Mahu letalto b'kuloi. Are you allowed to carry throughout the alleyway? Again, of course, as we've discussed, there was a certain common urban structure that existed in the time of the Mishnah, the time of the Gemara, where several homes would open into a chotzer, and then the chotzer would open into a mavoi. So you basically had a home that was part of a cul-de-sac, let's say, and the cul-de-sac was enclosed to some extent, and then that would open into a broader courtyard, which would then open into the Rishos Harabim. Not unlike some of the gated communities, or at least conceptually akin to many of the gated communities that are the hallmark of the Florida, just a drop west, where they drained the Everglades and they built a number of these homes in Weston and Davie and Culver City and maybe Hollywood out there too.
Rabbi,
Yes.
so how would we consider practically at La Mer from one building to the other?
Good question. Let's keep it in the let's first start with the fundamental building blocks of the picture, and then we can try to translate it to different buildings in the La Mer. It's a good question, because perhaps I said we're not going to talk about it. I'm going to talk. So let's hold off. We'll let's revisit this at the end of the Gemara, if you don't mind. So
Yes, Rosalie.
if there's a mavoi that does not have an eruv, connecting all of the chutzner, all the residents of the
for
chutzers
an exit road.
to the mavoi, mahu l'talta b'kulei, are you allowed to carry in it Rashi shlei nishlatu by eruv the chatzerois b'mavoi kari shituf. So Rashi says the word that we say nishtatifu, we mean eruv. It's just in the Mishnaic conversation. If it's a chatzer's eruv, we'll call it shituf, which means that they are fusing. They're creating a partnership. They're creating a unified common element. So the Gemara asks, Mi amrinon ki chatzer dami. What's the question? Malatalta l'kulai, Rashi. We're talking about kalim that are left inside. So he says you obviously can't carry from one to the other, but can you carry in the entire item? Do we compare it to a chatzar? By a chatzar, even if you didn't fuse the homes together, whatever was in the chatzar from Erev Shabbos, you can carry throughout. And just like a chatzar, an item that was left in the chatzar on Shabbos, you can carry throughout the chatzar. So maybe hainami, the mavei too. Even though there is no eruv, it has not become a common united element. There's not a group ownership or shutfus. Do we say mutla tata l'kulei? Or do we say a mavei and a chatzar are very different? Why? The chatzar is like arba mechitzos. A chatzer ultimately, structurally, has 4 walls. It is an enclosure. Whereas a mavoi was not structured to have walls. Inami chatzer is beid yarim. Less not beid yarim. Or difference is that a chatzer has a home opening into it, has residence, whereas a mavoi is just a thoroughfare that connects chatzers. Shasik, Amar Le Midi, Rabbi Asi was silent. He didn't respond to Rabbi Zera's question. Let's just see a few more Rashis. The question was, if they didn't fuse all the homeowners together. You're not allowed to carry from the chatzar to the home or from one home to the other, but you still could carry throughout the whole chatzar. The Gemara and Eruvin is going to describe that there's 3 different kinds of spaces. The Divrei Meir, Gagin, roofs is one din. The Chatzeros, Rishus La'atzim L'Taltim is Lazu, B'lei Eruv. Kalim Shishas B'Seichan Avalei Megagin L'Chatzeros. All right, we'll skip this Rashi for a moment. Inami Chatzer is Beid Yorin Kalaimar Asur lishtamish b'tadir. Or do we say that there's a distinction between a chatzar and a mavai? A chatzar is meant for common use. A mavai is much more conceptually akin to a public domain. And therefore, there is no license to carry. So he asked an interesting question, which again is a little bit off topic. The question was based on a conversation that preceded us. The conversation about a bris carrying, according to Rabbi Shimon, that you're allowed to carry from one chatzar to another so long as it remains in the chatzar. Therefore, he allows carrying the knife of the bris. Then Rabbi Zera asked Rav Asi, what about a mavai? Do we treat a mavai like a chatzar or not? He didn't answer. But Zimnin Ashkei the Yosef Kamar. Another time, Rabbi Zera found Rav Asi, and he was commenting on this question. What did he say? Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Masham Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Reish Lakish conveyed from in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Once upon a time, they forgot to bring the knife for the bris before Shabbos. And they carried the knife on Shabbos. The sages were highly disappointed at this behavior. Why were they disappointed? They asked, how could the Jews of that town abandon the psak of the Chachamim and to follow a minority of Rabbi Eliezer? Now, we'll read the Gemara, and then I'm sure many of you know the story of the oven of Achnoi, the famous argument between Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus and the Chachamim. And ultimately and tragically, Rabbi Elazar holds his own. He refuses to concede, even after supernatural display seemed to support Rabbi Elazar. The rabbis are led by Rabbi Gamliel are unmoved, and ultimately they place him in a excommunicate him. And the Chachamim of Yavne generally had a less than fully favorable view to Rabbi Elazar ben Hyrcanus following that story. And so the Gemara, the story here, that was conveyed to us by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, which probably was probably happened either in his youth or a generation prior, where they carried a knife on Shabbos, and the Chachamim were disappointed that they followed the viewpoint of Rabbi Eliezer and rejected the viewpoint of the Chachamim. What's wrong with listening to Rabbi Eliezer? Chada, Rabbi Eliezer Shamutihu. This is a famous line that you see in the Kloli Hashas in the history. Rabbi Eliezer was a Shamuti. Now, don't get nervous. I know there's some foul language in Hebrew that sounds not far from that word, but that's not what we are referencing. We'll see Rashi in a moment, and we'll see some other commentaries in a moment. Number one, Rabbi Elazar is a Shamuti, which is something that's not great. But more importantly, when there is a Yachid and a Rabbim, there's an individual and a plurality of opinion in Chazal, we follow the majority opinion. What is this Shamuti or Shamusi? Let's read Rashi. Barcheyu. He was cursed and excommunicated. Kidamrinan Behazav. This is the story that I just referenced. Tragic story, very tragic story. Just to show you the first few lines. Vizehu Taner Shachnoi. The story was well, anyways, he was rejected, and then he was placed into a nidoi or a cherem. They here. Amru Oisa Yom, after that whole argument, a view called Tara Shatir Velazar Vasar from Beish. They publicly displayed that anything he purified was not consistent with the halacha. V'nimnu alav, and they had a Sanhedrin consensus. Ubarcheyu. Literally, it means they cursed him, but it means that they ostracized him. They put him into a nidoi of sorts. And then Rabbi Akiva had to let him know. And a very, very tragic story, particularly because he was the brother-in-law of, was it Rabbi Yeshua or Rabbi Gamliel now? I don't remember. The Gemara there says it was the brother-in-law of Rabbi Gamliel, yeah. Anyways, Let's see. The Rashi continues and says, "With Talmud Yerushalmi Mefarish." In the Gemara, Yerushalmi gives another answer, which you'll find more comforting. Shamutihu mitalmidei Shammai haya. He was a student of the tradition of Shammai, and generally speaking, if there's a machlokes of Shammai and Beis Hillel, we reject the psak of Beis Shammai, and that is the way the second opinion in Rashi, and Tosfos makes the same point. Mi Beis Shammai. Truma the Tanan Hasam Son Truma Tmeya Shnaf Lemeya Son Torah Mishali Oystrim Son Matirim and Lachran Belazar Amar, etc., etc. So we see here that Rabbi Lazar was a opponent of the more strict and rigid philosophy of Beis Shammai. Now you want to take a look at the Rashba, ask the question that some of us are thinking. And the reason, it's probably also the underlying motivation of Tosfos to really not talk about the fact that he was excommunicated. Rashba Pirish, Rashi, Zal, Shebar Cheu, Rabbi Lazar was excommunicated. The Einai Mechovar, that can't be. Atamishum Shebar Cheu, like Te'alacha Kemaisa B'chol Makam. Is it true that he should, just because he was excommunicated at a time where he was cursed, we should never follow his halachic opinion? And therefore, the Rashba and Tosfos also, in different words, say that the issue with Rabbi Lazar was not his behavior; it had to do with the fact that he was from Beis Shammai. There you go. So, what's the point here? So interestingly enough, it seems like this whole conversation, which we're still in the middle of, was introduced really to tell us about this discussion about our Mishnah, which was the discussion of Beis Shammai. I'm sorry, the discussion of that they carried the knife on Shabbos, and the Chachamim were upset that they followed a Das Yachid. They followed Rabbi Lazar instead of the Chacham. If you want to see here too, the halacha should certainly be in accordance to the opinion of the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Lazar. Rabbi Yishia said, "She'elis es Rabbi Yehuda hagoizer," on the subject of carrying the knife. She'elis is Rabbi Yehuda HaGoizer. I asked Rabbi Yehuda HaGoizer, whom apparently, according to, let's see, Rashi. Rav Oishia responded to the folks here who were upset that they followed Rabbi Lazar. He said, She'elis is Rabbi Yehuda HaGoizer. Ask Rabbi Yehuda the chopper. Anyone want to guess what a chopper was? What was their job? Not a wood chopper. Well, Rashi, and I guess Rabbi Steinsaltz here says, the circumciser. So we're talking about a mohel. Today we call the circumciser a mohel. Well, it seems like once upon a time they were called the gozer, the cutter. I don't know. To me, mohel sounds a little less jarring than gozer, but that's just me. But Omar Lee, I asked him about this story, and he said, the story actually didn't happen that they carried it in the Rishus Harabim. They didn't carry it in a public thoroughfare. They carried it in a mavai. And it was really only carried from one end to the other. And that's the story. So now, let's back up here. Rabbi Asi was telling the story that Rav Zera overheard. What was the story? The whole story of the bris and the disappointment, and Rav Oishia's comment that it was a mavai shlenish tasvaboy. Omar lei. So let's see Rashi. Omar lei Rav Zera commented to Rav Asi. Almost fairly the marmad Omar lei lahai v'lei kashalach by midi sphere lamoto l'tadav kolei based on the comment over here. you should be allowed to carry from one end of the mavai to the other. Why didn't you answer me last time? You didn't answer me when I asked you if you can carry a mavai, but I heard you now giving a whole shir and a whole story, a history about a bris, and apparently you can carry an mavai. Amalei, spherely lamar mavai shlenishtatu mutal talta v'kulai. Does this mean that you actually believe you can carry an mavai that has no erev? Amarlei, and he said yes. Amarlei, Rav Zera says, "Ha, I once asked you and you didn't give me this answer." Let's keep Rashi centered here. Dilma agav shitvach roit loch Gemara. Maybe because you were racing through the Gemara, you didn't want to answer. Or maybe I guess he means that Amarlein agav shitvach roit ligmari. Or maybe he's saying at the time you didn't know, but now that you're reviewing the subject, it's come back to your attention. Rashi, Kishisa Shata Bigirsasach Lachshal Shmozu. Basically, Rabbi Zera says, Ravasi, is it possible that you didn't remember this then? But now that you're reviewing all this, the Talmud of your youth at Balpeh, it came back to you and he said, yeah, you're right. Actually, I forgot, but now I know. It's an interesting expression. I'm sorry. Reish here. Shmuel the Reish Lakish. Where was Reish Lakish? I want to point out interesting over here. Rabbi Zera. Where did Rabbi Zera live? Anyone know? So Rabbi Zera made Aliyah. He was in Bavel. We learned in our Gemara, he fasted a number of days. He asked his teacher, and his teacher initially didn't want him to go, and he snuck out. I don't know if you remember this. I think it was in either in the beginning of Shabbos or maybe it was in Brachas. And he comes to Eretz Yisrael, and Rav Asi and Rav Ami, I believe, were rabbis that were in Eretz Yisrael. They sometimes would come to Bavel. So it sounds like he's talking to Rav Asi, Israeli sage, and all of the traditions here that are being discussed, interestingly enough, all are Chachamim of Eretz Yisrael. You notice that? Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rabbi Oishia, who else? Well, I'm not familiar with Rabbi Yehuda Geyser besides for here, but it seems like this is a chunk of Talmud that's all, or almost all, Israeli Torah from Eretz Yisrael. Okay, here. Itmar, along the same lines, or on the subject rather, Itmar, Rav Zera conveyed an opinion on the matter from Rav. It said, Rav says we treat a mavai that doesn't have an erev like a Rishus Rabim. Whereas Rav Asi, we saw here paskins that you could, based on a teaching from his teachers, that you could carry the entirety of a mavai. Amar Abaye said, Hamilsa. Amra Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera said it. V'loi pirsha ad the asa Rabba Baravu Persha. Rashi. V'loi pirsha imasei mutar v'masei asa. Rav Zera discussed mavois, but he didn't explain. But Rabba Baravu explained. Amar Rab Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravu, Amar Rav. A clarification of Rav's opinion, which again was, you can only carry arba amais. Mavoi shlinish tatu boy in a mavoi that doesn't have an eruv. Eruv chatzeres and batim ein metalton by elo arba amas. If there was an eruv between the courtyards and the homes, you can only carry 4 amas. Like eruv chatzeres and batim mutal talton. I'm going to read Rabbi Steinsaltz for this. If they join the courtyard with the houses, the homeowners within each courtyard are joined together and are therefore permitted to carry within the courtyards, you cannot carry in the mavai. But if you did not combine all the chutzner and the houses, you can carry in the mavai. I don't know why. Let's see Rashi. Ervu chatzeres shebim mavai im bateihem shebnei habatim moitzim lechatzereseihem. If you're allowed to carry from the home to the chatzer, sheirvu batim apsuchim lechatzer yachad v'chein b'nei chatzer acheres. אבל בני החצרס לא נשלט במאווה, אין מטלטים במאווה, אפילו כלים שפסו בסכם לדל, שאסור בני הבתים להויצים מבתים לחצר. So ironically, the more license there is to carry in the chatzer, it sounds like the less license there is to carry in the mavai. Again, I don't fully understand this yet, but that is the Gemara. Now the Gemara is going to continue to analyze. I'm tempted to pause here for today. Because it's been a little bit of an intense Gemara here. And tomorrow we'll start off with the analysis of this Gemara about why we would distinguish between a mavai and a chatzer, and then we'll move on to other topics that are more familiar to Masechah Shabbos and less familiar or less mavai related. So I think we're going to pause right over here. Hi, dear friends.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for joining us today. Another action-packed, fast-paced, dramatic segment of the Talmud. We had people running from roof to roof, running through backyards, all
with
to
a
facilitate
knife.
With a knife, all to facilitate a circumcision. We've had the interesting historic reference to the fact that Rabbi Elazar was not supremely favored by virtue of his identity as part of the base Shammai community. It would also explain, it also generally might explain some of the tension that existed in Yavne. Elazar came from a more strict tradition, maybe even than Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel came from the house of Hillel, right?
OGI 2455838.
Ellie here. Here we go.
I'm surprised. I'm surprised nobody suggested bringing the baby up to the roof.
We did see, didn't we see that? I think we saw that. The long story short is that baby, we're not schlepping babies on rooftops. Just before we close out, I want to see if we get a little more analysis on the Rabbi Elazar rejection story.
But he was actually being, in this case, he was being more lenient as opposed to being more strict.
In our case, he was being more lenient. That's correct. Or, well, depends how you look at it. He was being machmir in Mila. He was being strict in the power of circumcision. Interesting. There's a very, very popular commentary on Masechah Shabbos called Shabbas Ch. The truth is, I don't know why we don't have it here in Shul. I should probably get a copy now that we're at the end of Masechah Shabbos.
Yeah.
But he writes, you know why Rashi doesn't say that Rabbi Elazar was from Beis Shammai? Because there are other very important and popular Tanoim who do get attention and aren't rejected, who also came from Beis Shammai. And he quotes, for example, Rabbi Tarfon. We don't find that we reject them. The Chassam Sofer writes that there's something unique about Rabbi Eliezer, which is he never quotes. Whenever he says halacha, he never is found quoting his teacher. It's because he is always and entirely quoting the scholarship and the halacha of Beis Shammai. And so he, although there are many Talmidim of Beis Shammai, he was a super Talmud of Beis Shammai. Anyways, there you have it. All right, folks, have a wonderful day. A big Asher Koyach. Let's hear good news. Dr. Pasternak, you don't have yards. You have yahrzeit today?
Yeah, no, last week.
Okay. I'm sorry we missed it. What was, so before we close, who was the yahrzeit?
Shmuel ben Yisrael Moshe.
Shmuel ben Yisrael Moshe. So this is your father. I'm sorry I was Halevi. I'm sorry I was away for the yard site. Why don't we do like this? Bli neder. We'll do the Shabbos packages. You will talk about that later, and we'll do for this week. Why don't we honor it? We'll do it after the fact, but we'll honor and commemorate, remember your father, and dedicate our learning for Shmuel ben Yisrael Moshe Halevi. He's Neshama Shavan Aliyah. And doctor, we're privileged to have you on the shir. Hashem should bless you and all of us with Gezunt and Koyach. And thank you for being a part of this.
Yeah. Thank you.
Neshama Shavan Aliyah. All right, take
Yes,
care. Thank you.
Yes, Shakar.
Go.